doing?
Thanks, Stephen.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Before we start, I just want to say a few things about the subject of John's book. Joy Division are my favourite band. When I first heard Joy Division as a teenager, I felt that it just really opened my horizons. I've never heard anything as intense, as stark and as beautiful as their music, and became a obsessive fan over the years. Listened to music constantly, read everything about them, and yeah, it's a real honour to be here with John, whose other books I've loved so much. His book's fantastic. I don't know if you've read it, but yeah, really just going to have a wee chat with John about his awesome book and his experiences writing it and living through those times with Joy Division.
And we can talk about how you nearly played with Lou Reed.
Oh no, we're not going to talk about that. Yeah, so just going to start, John, tell us a wee bit about how you first heard Joy Division and how you interacted with them and how you got to the point in time now where you've got this book.
Well, I went up to Manchester for the first time in October 1977 for an event called the Last Night of the Electric Circus, and it was the closing of Manchester's premier punk club, which was in basically a disaster zone in Collyhurst. It was full of empty 1930s flats, and it looked as though a bomb had hit the whole place. And on this, I was writer for Sounds at that point. Sounds was one of the weekly music papers, one of the 4 weekly music papers. And so I went up to review this event, and there were about 10 or 12 groups, including 4 who I never liked. Sorry. And I love saying that so much. And there were obviously Buzzcocks, who I adored, and then there were a lot of other groups. And the interesting thing about the time was that there were a lot of competent punk groups. So there were a lot of musicians who'd been playing for 2 or 3 or 4 years, and punk had come along and they sped up. And so there were groups like the Drones who were on that night, and they were just terrible, even though they were competent. And the groups who interested me, probably like the kind of groups that interest you, were the groups whose ambition exceeded their ability. So you could hear them reaching for something that was out of they were reaching for something. They could see it in their eyes, but they couldn't get there. And I was like the weird groups. And the ones who were on that night were The Worst, who were a group from Manchester who looked as though they'd stepped out of an industrial waste, and they did Velvet Underground drone covers for about 10 minutes. And the drummer had a rubbish bin, I remember. And there was another group called Prefects, who were from Birmingham, who were fantastic. And they had this song called VD, which just went, I got VD, I got VD, I got VD. That was it. Conceptual. And then there was Warsaw, and Warsaw were one of those groups who you could see that they were reaching for something, and they hadn't got there, but there was something that got my interest, and I wrote a couple of lines about them in the review, and that got my interest. And because of that, through a chain of circumstances, in June the next year, I was still working for Sounds, and I reviewed the live album that came out called Last Night of the Electric Circus, with a not very good Joy Division track on it, and they changed their name from Warsaw to Joy Division. And I wrote something nice about it, and I got this letter in the post, handwritten letter. Dear John, I see that you've written about Joy Division. We've just recorded this LP for RCA Records. It's crap, but I thought you might like to hear it. And we're just reissuing our first EP, which was crap, but I thought you might like to hear the reissue. And I thought, well, that's
refreshingly honest.
Yeah, and I was intrigued by somebody who would be so frank, and so then began a chain of circumstances that meant that I went up to Manchester in April 1979 to work at Granada Television, which is where Tony worked. It was big media, it was a very difficult job to get. And Tony, I now realise that Tony Wilson, who helped me get the job, got me there because I was reasonable, right? I could get lead reviews in the music press. And he'd lost Paul Morley. Paul Morley had gone down to London, and so he wanted somebody to write about his groups. And so I went to Manchester and wrote about his groups.
When you first saw them, did you foresee what they would become? Or did you just think they were another promising band at the time?
Absolutely not. I hoped that they would become something, because there's something about them that I like. And I didn't really get the full experience until I went to Manchester. One of the first times I remember being absolutely bowled over. I always thought Joy Division worked very well on a big stage, because the music was very intense, it was heavy in the deepest sense, it was very physical live, and the performance was very intense and uncompromising. And on a big stage they had room to move, the sound had room to disperse, and actually, because it was quite ambient, some of it sounded good in a good space. And I remember seeing them at the Free Trade Hall supporting John Cooper Clarke on a big stage, and they were just fantastic. And that's when I realised, these guys are just... I didn't even think they were world beaters or anything, I was just totally involved.
Mm-hmm. One thing about the book is all first person. There's no narration between it. It's just interviews or things said or things recorded, and it's in chronological order. And one thing that really astounded me, maybe because I'm getting older and things seem to pass very quickly, was this progression that was in a very short space of time, from them being at the very start of the story a very scratchy punk band, to the end of the story coming out and playing The Eternal as an encore, with just this kind of heartfelt, synth-led, heartbreaking song. And I just wondered how that felt at the time, because that kind of progression must have been unusual.
It wasn't necessarily unusual, funnily enough, because I was a great fan of Wire, and Wire made great leaps and bounds in that period. And quite a lot of the groups who were coming out, Public Image made leaps and bounds. To use two groups who were working in Susie and the Banshees actually they made not a very good leap with their second album, that didn't matter. But that was the period, it was a time when people were vaulting forward, and of course I was involved, and I'd go and see them regularly, and I was very friendly with Rob Gretton, their manager, and Martin Hannett, their producer, and Tony Wilson. And so it seemed quite natural. What I did observe is that I saw them that summer at the Lee Festival, which is a Zoomix factory half the way between at Lee, and there was nobody there, and the police were arresting everybody with any drugs. And they were just fantastic again. They were playing a set that was half not Unknown Pleasures. They'd moved on already from that, and that was September. And there is an LP actually, pretty much between Unknown Pleasures and Closer, which is Transmission, Dead Souls, The Only Mistake, Sound of Music, those kind of tracks. And they were just, I think they worked very hard, Stuart, and they were on fire. And I think that's what I love about the book, is that, you're talking about people making art. And that's what I really like about it, because that's what interests me. They were making art.
That was something that really stuck out to me, and it wasn't something that happened by accident. As a fan, I'd always thought that this had somehow happened by accident, that the Dead Souls and Atmosphere single being free with a French, or coming with a French fanzine, I thought that had been some kind of mistake, and they'd always been planning for that to be some huge single for their third album. But it was very purposeful. That was something they wanted to do. They wanted to support people making or creating culture that wasn't mainstream, and they were actually very proud of not being mainstream, and very ambitious, but not commercially ambitious in what they wanted to do. But in a strange way, there was a real clash, because they were also just daft wee guys. They were just little drunk 22-year-olds putting cornflakes in each other's bed and just being fannies. So,
stealing beer.
Yeah. Calling Ian's mistress the
Belgian boiler.
Belgian boiler.
No, that was hooking.
it's an eye opener. But yeah, there's an amazing clash there, just high culture and kind of low humour all together at the same time.
Well, I think that yes, I mean the very important thing is the idea of independence, and that's something that Buzzcocks really set out the Spiral Scratch, and that was very important. And that stayed in Manchester. That created the idea that Manchester could be this autonomous other city than London, and I think that was very important. And I was very struck when I went into the Manchester punk scene that it was very inclusive. In London, very quickly it became. I mean, I hated London punk by October '77 because it became very music industry. There was lots of cocaine, and it just was very corrupt and very boring, really. Business as usual, and there were lots of terrible punk groups who were competent and had sped up, and there was New Wave as well, and that was crap. And so Manchester was very inclusive. People were artists, and they did fanzines, and it was all in a flow, really. And I think the idea of Spiral Scratch is so important, and what Buzzcocks did is so important, because they then inspired, obviously, other people doing the same thing, Desperate Bicycles and then Rough Trade, etc., Mute. But also they inspired Rob Gretton's great decision, let's do the LP on Factory. Yeah. And we don't have to go down to London and talk to ourselves.
Yeah, that really kind of...
And he was right.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually, I made a few notes in the book, and that was one of the things that struck a chord when Tony Wilson says, yeah, literally, as he said, we'll put the record out, they don't have to go to London and talk to ourselves. And I don't want to talk about myself, but when we made a record with Chemic Underground, that was almost the exact same conversation, and it just really resonated. Going to
But actually, if you don't do that, you see, if they become a music industry punk group, or you got involved in the major music industry, you then get taken over by Music Industry Times. So you'd have to, Joy Division would have had to release a single every 3 months, probably have a brightly coloured Hypnosis sleeve. If you didn't get beyond number 42, then they'd be dropped before they had an album. That's the way it worked. It's brutal. And, the music industry dealt with punk and post-punk in a very crude way. And they then gave themselves the ability to develop like any independent musician, and a lot of independent musicians in this city have done since. You have the freedom to develop, which is so important, to develop at your own page according to your instinct and your talent.
Absolutely. The book isn't just about the band Joy Division, but it's very much about the city of Manchester, and it's about the characters that frame the story, and who, had they not existed and had they not made certain decisions, the band wouldn't have been in the position to make the music and have the legacy they have. And obviously you were friends with these people, many of whom aren't around anymore, so maybe just talk a little bit about some of those people and your relationship and your impressions of them.
Well, I always forget that I call it the Joy Division tax, and I always get very enthusiastic in wanting to talk about the Joy Division because I love the music. I still listen to them a lot. And I'm sort of obsessed with various live tapes, which are just, the live sound is fantastic. And I've got, 20 or 30 gigs on my computer and all this stuff. And then I forget, of course, there's a lot of death, and we'll talk about Ian later, but I was very friendly with the three older people, because I was a bit older than the group. I wasn't particularly friendly with the group, we were acquaintances. But I was very friendly with Rob and Tony and Martin. And of course, they're all dead. And that is, it's quite upsetting. And they all died, I'm now 65, they all died before they made 60. Martin didn't even make 50. And I find that bizarre. There was no sense that that was going to happen. I knew them all back in the day. Everybody was very excited and enthusiastic, and it was very positive. And I think probably also it's to do with the fallout from Ian's death, which we will talk about later, but it was a terrible event, and I don't think a lot of the people involved ever got over it.
Bridging obviously the sadness of him not being around, but going back to the most positive thing about the story being the music, is the role of Martin Hannett And this, for me, was really framed as a bit of prep. I put on a Joy Division record last night. I was listening to Still, and then on the way down, I was listening to some of the recorded music. Still's mostly live. And the difference, it could have been two different bands. And having read in your book the accounts of Martin Hannett in the studio, where he just pretty much brutalised them. But really, from hearing what they sounded like without a producer, they needed it. He was really kicking them into shape. He was making them play better. He was honing into what they were good at and trying to minimise what they weren't so good at, and getting to the point where those recordings he made, I think, are as close to flawless as you get. Flawless and imaginative. And he also clearly recognised that Ian Curtis was a genius and an incredible singer, performer. What was he like as a guy, and how do you think he affected the music that he made?
Well, Martin had been a chemist, and he always had great drugs. He always had the strongest pot. I mean, that's the only drug I took in those days, but he always... I remember going to Strawberry, just after I moved, and they were recording on their places. And the band went there and showed me around. And he was busy fussing around in the corner of the studio. And I said, what are you doing? And he said, come on, have a look. And there was a lift, and there was a Leslie speaker in the lift. And it was going... And I said, what are you doing? He said, recording the lift. I was very fond of Martin. I spent a lot of time with him. I didn't work with him professionally, but we were friends. And we used to get very, very stoned and drive around Manchester all night. That was our idea of entertainment. He taught me a lot. I think that, I remember when Unknown Pleasures came out, I was quite taken aback, because I'd seen the group a lot live by this, or several times live by this stage, and they were very raw, and particularly guitar sound. And he really toned it down and made it different. And I listened to it again the other day, and it just sounds, to me now, it just sounds really weird. And there's all these odd sounds and something, and these crashings here and there. And you think, well, this is a sound picture, and it is psychedelic, and it is ambient. And I think that did help Joy Division find a wider audience, and also help them to connect more with Manchester, because I just moved to that city, and the empty spaces in the music, if you think of a song like Candidate, you know that song? There's hardly any guitar in it at all, just a slight wash. I mean, it's very, very stark, and I like the space in the music. I love dub reggae, which Ian Curtis loved dub reggae as well. And I liked space in music. And that space seemed to fit the space of Manchester, which at that time was very derelict. Vast areas of the city that were just empty. And that record helped me orient myself around the city. I could interpret the city through that record, because I see the world through music. Like a lot of us here, I don't see the world through football, I see it through music. And so I think that by the time later in the book, where there's that whole sequence, they're in the studio recording Love Will Tear Us Apart, and they're doing These Days, it's a very interesting sequence, which is described on the end times. Somebody was in the studio, just two people in the studio describing what went on. And These Days is a fantastic track. You know it. Do you know it? It starts with what sounds like a synthesizer, but it isn't a synthesizer. It's a guitar put through a very fast gate. And Bernard, actually, you see Bernard working with Martin Hannett, and they're working together. Martin's not telling Bernard what to do. Martin's operating the controls, and Bernard's there like the keen student. Because Bernard was very technological as well. And that was the thing that made Joy Division different, was that they were technological. They were interested in synthetics. They were interested in disco textures, which very few rock groups were then. And that made them something quite different. They were very futuristic in a way. Certainly Closer is quite a future. I mean, it's so sad, but as a sound picture, it's quite futuristic and odd.
Yeah, I mean, I think Isolation is one of the most ahead of its time songs that almost defined the next decade. Absolutely. The other musical observation I made when listening to the raw recording last night compared to the final studio recordings today was just how integral Stephen Morris was.
Yeah.
And that had they not had such an incredible drummer and someone so imaginative and so great at being cohesive with all the other instruments, they might never have got the attention that they would. It's almost a perfect storm. No one overplayed in the band, almost like the Velvet Underground that we were talking earlier on. Everyone had a role and just did it.
I'd be interested to hear what you say about this. But I think my observations. I'm not a musician, but I've hung around with the world. When there's a group, somebody has to lead. There's always the instrument that is the lead instrument. In the Rolling Stones, it's Keith Richards' guitar. But in Joy Division, it's Peter Hook's bass.
Mm.
And so you've got the bass leading, and the drums and the guitar following. And so they're filling in. The drum, Stephen is genius. And Bernard is providing, a lot of the time, he's providing texture. So they were inverting the classic rock band model. It was much more like Perubu, where you have the very, very high bass in Perubu. And I just think that's very interesting, the way that groups work together, who actually kicks off and who is then driving it, and then where the other musicians fit in.
Yeah. I mean, the music we make, it changes. It can be one person, it can be piano, it can be bass, or it can be guitar. But you're right. I think in most Joy Division songs, it is the bass, and it's so integral. You think of Insight, or you think of She's Lost Control, or even Love Will Tear Us Apart. The melody is the bass, and it's probably why he's so pissed off that he's been chucked in the band.
He left, Stuart. Actually, we did the interviews for the book before all that happened, so we don't have any Queenie bitching in the book.
Going back to the book, that was one thing I was going to ask, because the interviews weren't done at the same time, obviously because some of the people aren't around anymore, so they come from a very varied point in time. But actually, to me, that felt really good, because a lot of this has been coloured. I've read Bernard and Peter Hook's reflections on this stuff, and it's all about their personal experiences. They find it hard to detach from that.
Yeah.
And when were all the interviews done?
The bulk of the interviews were done in 2006 for the Joy Division film, which some of you might have seen, the Joy Division documentary. And of course, as what happens in any film, you end up by only using 10% or less of the material. We get fantastic interviews with Bernard. We talked to Bernard. I did the bulk of the interviews. I remember talking to Bernard for about 4 or 5 hours, and he just talked about everything. And he wasn't being. None of them were being sarky or off or arsey. They were all really focused. And then the interview with Deborah Curtis was from the early 90s, and then there were a few others from the early 90s when I did a piece for Mojo, and then I did a few new ones. And I was very happy about that, because it meant that it didn't get into this score settling, which of course is not relevant to the topic. And the book ends sharply in 1980, just because I thought, end it there, and then people know the story if they want to fill in. And actually, one thing that I nearly put in was a long quote that Bernard gave me about Mark Reeder, who's an important person in the story. And he was Factory Deutschland, and he'd been in the Frantic Elevators with Mick Hucknall, and he knew all the group before they were in the group, and used to go and buy records from me and Curtis at Rare Records in '74. And he said that Bernard gave me this interview, and he said he was very depressed after Ian died and didn't know what to do, and Mark said, come over to Berlin, we'll smoke a whole load of spliff and we'll go to a nightclub. And they went to this club called the Metropole, which you can find material on it online. And it was a great sort of electronic disco club. And they play sort of a mandolier and Supernature by Chironi and Underwater by Harry Thurman, and all these sort of very ambient, disco-y, synthetic records, wonderful records. And that gave Bernard the direction to go forward with the big turning point for me in the whole story is really Everything's Gone Green, which is a fantastic record. And that's when New Order really stopped, kick into gear. And I think Joy Division might have gone that way because they were already sort of getting towards Moroder on Closer, but who knows?
Yeah, there's a great bit in the book where Rob Gretton just turns up with a bunch of electro records. Well, right in the middle of punk, just says, check this out, this is what you should be doing. And I think there's another observer there, and he's like, at the time just thought this was completely bizarre. Like, why are they not listening to other punk bands? But they always had something of the future about them.
I mean, I presume it's the same in Glasgow, but Manchester's a big black music town. So obviously it was a big clearing centre for a lot of Northerns. When I first went there, I go to these stalls in the underground market, and then be full of Northern Soul records. And I thought I knew music, and I didn't know not one of these records that I know. So it was a very, very big black music town, which has always tended to be underwritten, and there's a great story to be written there, actually. And so it was kind of a reflection of their environment. And of course, a lot of black dance music is in fact more futuristic than rock music. And it still is. Well, so it's logical for them to go and get the syndrome and go bing boo.
Yeah.
Stephen says.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. I mean, there's loads of, because I think Mancunians are the funniest people on this island. I always think that they'll make anything fucking hilarious, and that comes across really well. And even just talking about Stephen Morris talking about his syndrome, and who had no idea what he was doing, and just having a laugh and getting deafened by it and all this stuff. It reads really, really well. It's really, really good.
His best story was Bernard tells. He said, Martin really had it in for Steve, and he made Steve had a really good idea of doing the hi-hat pattern, and She's Lost Control with the spray. And he put Stephen in an isolation booth with this spray, but it was fly spray. And so he was doing it for however long, 3 minutes, and nearly expired.
There's quite a lot of hijinks. My favourite hijinks maybe when they filled the Buzzcocks tour bus with mice. That was great. And
in Revenge, their roadies dropped a trifle through the sunroof of Stephen's Cortina.
So it's not doing anything for the public impression of musicians being really childish, but no, I definitely.
They're all really young, that's the thing.
Yeah.
I mean, Buzzcocks were only 23, 24. I mean, the drummer in Buzzcocks was probably only 18, John Mark.
Yeah.
And all Joy Division were probably by then 21, 22. I mean, that's really young. And, they're on a spree.
Having fun.
Yeah. I'm sure you've done that, Stuart.
Never with the mice. A few cakes have been thrown about over the years, but yeah, never the mice.
Flight cases? Going down the stairs in flight cases?
Not yet. No. The night is young. So you did say the saddest part of the story is obviously the people that died, and obviously the most famous person who died was Ian Curtis. His illness, when he developed epilepsy early in the band's career, and I guess this does go back to the age thing, because this is one thing, reading it, I thought at the time as a guy in his 40s now, I was like thinking about when they could have cancelled gigs and they shouldn't. The worst one is the gig in Bury, when he'd actually had a suicide attempt, and they got him out of hospital to come up and sing 2 songs while they cobbled together a set with the support band. I mean, I can't imagine the gig in Bury was a huge payer.
No.
I mean, it seems abhorrent that that's through my 42-year-old eyes. When you're 22 and you're playing a gig and you think, you have to do it. If we don't do it, no one will book us for another gig. I've never been in a situation as dire as that one, but been on tour with people who are ill and probably should have cancelled gigs that didn't. And I can see why they didn't. But there must be so much regret from them because of the way that went.
Well, the problem is that, I mean, the real problem in a way is that Factory's success, they had hits after Ian died. So there's a lot of very unresolved material in the Factory story. And I know Ian's death broke Martin. He was never the same after that. And I don't think it did Rob any good either. He had a health breakdown in 1986 and was never the same. And Tony carried on in his merry way, but it affected him as well. And it's hard not to. I mean, it was very interesting for me. I mean, I don't think there's any mystery about Ian's death, to be honest. And I don't like speculating about it either, because to me it's more interesting to talk about the music, because that's why we're here. We're not here because Ian killed himself. But I finally understood why what happened. When I was doing the book, just putting everything in order, putting just the escalation of the illness, the poor treatment he received for the illness. Did he ever think he was going to get better? They had the show at the Rainbow on the 4th of April where he collapsed on stage in front of a huge audience. Then they went to do another gig at the Moonlight. 4 days later, they go to Bury, this disaster happens. And it's just, you can see this is just everything was going faster and faster and faster. And I think he probably, I said I wouldn't speculate, but there's just a sense of this, everything whirling faster and faster.
A spiral of events.
And I very much felt that. It helped me. I mean, I was on the periphery, I was on the outer circle, but it was a very profoundly upsetting event, and not one that anybody at the time was able to process, because we didn't have the emotional language at that point, really, in the north of England in 1980. And it affected very deeply anybody who was involved. And it certainly affected the close people involved. I don't think anybody who was involved, closely involved, that means Rob and Tony and Martin and the group, ever actually fully recovered. I think some of them have done a very good job of it, but I think it really was a shattering event. Because he's so young, because he was 23.
Yeah.
I mean, that's young.
Indeed. Is there anything else you want to add?
Should we talk about your favourite Joy Division songs? That's always a good one.
Yeah.
What's your favourite Joy Division song?
My favourite Joy Division song, I think, is Decades.
You can have 3. Because I want 3.
Yeah, I think Decades, because of the sparseness and the ambience and the beauty of it. I think Dead Souls, and that came up in the book so much.
Yeah.
Because that was, for a long time, their opening song.
Yeah.
I think Dead Souls is definitely one I'm really, really, really fond of. No Love Lost.
Oh,
No Love Lost.
That's great.
Yeah, which is it's on the first EP.
Yeah.
But you can hear where they're going. It has that groove, and it has that kind of
it's great.
Teutonic kind of vibe to it, and yeah.
It's good driving, so you can drive to it.
Absolutely. What about yours?
Dead Souls. And that was also the nearest sound at the time to what they sounded like live. So it's quite a quick, sort of live-ish recording. It's a wonderful, wonderful. I saw them play it live several times, and it really was, wonderful set opening. And also it's quite scary because he's talking, seeing these visions and take me away, all this stuff. And Autosuggestion, because it's so dreamy and odd. And I always used to play that. I used to play that when I DJed, which is why nobody came. And I used to play that next to, I think I played at the Hacienda one night when I was pissed off with everybody. At the Hacienda, I DJed at the Hacienda the first year in 1982, and all these kids would come up and ask for Killing Joke. And culture time was like, no. You're going to get 6 minutes of auto-suggestion, followed 7 minutes of Home is Where the Heart Is by Public Image. Work very well together, by the way. Try it next time. And the final one is These Days. I love These Days. I love the lyric and I love the sound.
Mentioned there the weird lyrics on Dead Souls actually made me think of something else that comes up in the book. There's actually something quite paranormal in the book, quite Fortean. And there's one bit, I think it's Bernard describes how they heard the sound of a ghost during the recording of Decades. I think it was Decades or The Eternal, one of the closer songs. And there's also the where Bernard does the regression, hypnotism with Ian. Was the time that Bernard, did you do the interview with him about that?
Yes.
And was that the first time you told anyone about it?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. Bernard was very frank about it. I thought he was going to, I don't want to talk about this too late. He was fine. And I think you touched on something very interesting. I have had a few spirit world experiences, and it's not a place where I choose to be because I prefer to be in this world. It's just easier. But I have had a couple of very unsettling experiences, one featuring Ian Curtis.
Really?
And I do think that there is something beyond the mundane in Joy Division. And I think there's something timeless in their music, which is partly to do with the music itself and the subject matter, and also with the live performances, because Ian would stop time and he would accelerate time and he would freeze time with the movements that he did. And so there's a very strange thing about Joy Division and time, but there's also a thing about Joy Division and, I don't know why they call it the occult, because that's such a degraded word, but beyond the mundane, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, when people have asked me what I like about music, if I feel like getting into a big conversation, I'll often say that music is magic, not just magic as in really good, as in, well, there's something that I can't explain about this. We're shaking the air and making people feel different. If that's not magic, what is it? There is something really special about it, and I think that, to me, Joy Division are the greatest group of all time, and if they're not creating magic, what would they do?
Well, I think we're so used to talking about music in terms of process and industry and collecting.
In context.
Particularly us boys. And all that stuff, that we forget about the magic. And I think that I certainly felt joy, when I saw them, I felt Joy Division had it. And part of that was to do with Ian didn't have any stagecraft. So, when you go and see, for instance, when you go and see a concert performer, I know it's dead. One that comes to mind is David Bowie. I saw David Bowie in the 90s when I was doing all the interviews for this piece I did for Mojo 1994. And he knew exactly what to give and exactly what to withhold. He'd come on stage, go to the front, he knew exactly what he was doing. It wasn't calculated, it was just somebody who really knew what he was doing to put on a show. It's show business to some extent, and there's nothing wrong with that. You're putting on a show. But with Ian, it wasn't a show. It was this very personal thing that he was expressing in front of people. It wasn't necessarily his emotions, it was something he was working out, and it was something that he went into a trance. It's like what Iggy says about the early Stooges. I never saw the early Stooges, wish I had. But it's the same sort of thing. You're on stage, you've got the music really loud, electricity pumping through you, and you go into a kind of trance. And those performances are incredibly exciting because you don't know where it's going to end. There's a sense of danger to it. Most of the time you go and see people, you know what's going to happen. And there's something satisfying about that. But it's very exciting and disturbing to see a performer who has no filters, and he had no filters at all. And that, of course, is not something that's ultimately sustainable either. You can't keep on doing that, it's too exhausting. And the last time I saw Joy Division was actually 3 days after Berry. And they were playing a show at the Factory, which is a small club, very low ceiling, small stage, a couple of hundred capacity. Probably about this size, maybe slightly bigger. And I left half the way through. I couldn't cope with it, it was too intense. It was too much. I couldn't deal with it. And so there was that sense of something being potentially out of control and then getting more and more out of control. So there are all those elements to the story, but I do think the magic or the beyond the mundane element is very important in Joy Division, and I think that's why people still listen to them, because they take them out of the everyday. You know, when you listen to Joy Division, you're not thinking about bloody Brexit or whatever. You know, the everyday shit. And that's what music used to be. Music used to take you out of the everyday shit. Now, too often, particularly mainstream music, is part of the everyday shit.
Well, just shit.
Ed Sheeran? Jesus. Serious. I mean, I get the R&B stuff and the hip hop, but Ed fucking Sheeran.
You've not heard his early sevens?
Actually used to be hip hop before. No, that's actually true. I used to hang out with all the London hip hop kind.
I bet that was even worse.
It was terrible, but
Will we see if people have some questions?
This is always a difficult bit.
I'll make them.
Don't be afraid.
I'll put a few glasses away and I'll just make them ask questions.
I've got one. As somebody that was around at the time and knew the band and knew the manager, everything that's happened since, there's obviously some myths that have cropped up and get fed into. Is there any of them where you're just like, no, it wasn't like that, or that didn't happen?
Well, when I was doing the book, I didn't want to have me in it really, because I wanted it to be very firmly grounded in what people said. And so many people have written in a rather hyperventilated way about Joy Division, including myself, that I thought, I'm just going to give it a rest. And I'm so tired also of, I wanted to, there are a couple of things I didn't put in the book. That we didn't interview with Genesis P-Orridge, and I just didn't believe some of the things he said.
I was asking about that one.
But I didn't.
Yeah.
You know, actually,
I didn't.
I spent an evening with Psychic TV one time. during a bomb scare in Birmingham. This is true. And Genesis did tell me a load of stuff, and I was kind of like, am I going to even mention this? And I'm glad you said that because it seemed bad shit.
Well, I knew Genesis back in the day when he was with Throbbing Gristle. And anyway, I refused to interview him for the documentary. I just didn't want to be involved. And the director said, we've got to have him in it. So I said, you go and interview him. So he went and interviewed him. And Genesis said all this stuff about Ian's last evening. And so he had it in the cut, and I said, why is this here? And he said, well, and he said, we can't substantiate it. This is really serious stuff. If we can't substantiate it, it can't be in the documentary. This is actually using journalistic skills. It's not actually taking stuff at face value. Most of the stuff in the doc, particularly with something that's very sensitive and very serious, you have to be very careful. And we couldn't substantiate what Genesis said. We just couldn't. And I'm not saying that he made it all up or whatever, but we couldn't substantiate, so he wasn't in the documentary. That part wasn't in the documentary.
It wasn't bad shit. I shouldn't have said that. It wasn't.
Well,
it's
people inserting themselves into the narrative.
Yeah,
it's really
that's how I felt, and I also thought there was a lot of conjecture, and
Anyway, we'll get cursed at.
maybe the first.
Genesis once asked me whether I'd join the Psychic Youth, and I said, fuck off, Genesis, I'm your friend. I'm not going to join your bloody cult. And you know, you had to get scarified and you had to have bits pierced and everything. It's fuck off. Sigils, that was the thing, sigils.
I was going to ask the question, given that you knew the band so well, what do you think the next album would have sounded like if Ian hadn't died? Would it have been like New Order, or would it be something totally different? I'm expecting the latter.
I mean, I don't really do what ifs, but I presume it would have been like, more like Isolation, and these days it would be more electronic with a pulse. But then it all depended on Ian, and Ian's condition was worsening, hence you get the second side of Closer, which is pretty brutal, to be honest. So I just can't say. I mean, this is, of course, part of the Joy Division story is that there's a limited catalogue. There's something, I can't remember exactly, there's 48 songs. It's an easily, that's what makes it a good topic for a book, actually. It's a short time, no, I'm being serious. It's a short time scale, and it's a small catalogue. And I say this because I did do a book that had a time scale of 70 years, and it did my head in. So to do a book that's 3 or 4 years is just a breeze.
What's your take on the filmic representation of Joy Division, feature film Control, for example, and even 24-Hour Party People, which features a number of the same musicians?
I thought Control was pretty good, actually. I mean, once I got past the biopic element, which is I knew the people, and that's not rock record. But once you get past that, it's actually very good. 24-Hour Party People, I didn't like because it was smearing Joy Division with Happy Mondays.
And Marky Smith as well, so...
Yeah, and I quite like the Happy Mondays music, but I didn't like the whole vibe. And certainly it accelerated Tony Wilson's downfall, all that, being involved with those kind of drugs. So I didn't like 24-Hour Party People. It wasn't a jolly romp. I mean, it wasn't all serious, but it wasn't a sort of carry-on style romp. And Tony wasn't a total wanker, and it's just stupid. And that sort of thing is really annoying. I don't mind when it's like Anton's film is concentrating on something and makes it work. So the biopic element is not, he's actually narrowing it down, you see what I mean? And that's a lot more valid, really, than doing kind of carry-on rock with verifiable recent history. I mean, but then I wouldn't like that because I'm a historian, I'm not an amusement filmmaker. Hi.
How easy is it to remember seeing Joy Division live? You say you saw several gigs, and the memories come back quite easily. And do you have a favourite kind of like a wow moment from seeing them live?
I have to work on it, and some of it is disappeared in the haze of marijuana smoke, I'm afraid. I remember impressions. So I do remember hearing Dead Souls when they played at Lee and being bowled over, and liking them, and saying when I saw them at Free Trade Hall. And I saw them, I was actually with Richard Boone when he was filming. The great thing for me is that I was with Richard Boone
Apollo.
in The Gods and the Apollo in Manchester when he was filming the gigs that became Here Are the Young Men. And so that really, really takes me back. And then too, again, they were on a big stage. But you know, yes, you do get kind of false memories. I have to be quite strict with myself. I mean, you know, it's what, 40 years ago. He wasn't even alive, so yeah, you weren't there. How many of you can remember anything more than impressions of gigs you saw 40 years ago?
I was 40 yesterday.
What?
I was 40 yesterday.
So, you know, that happened during your gestation. Yeah.
Me. Okay. This is a wee bit of a writing question. I saw you said at the weekend that you were quite influenced by the Gene Stein book on Edie Sedgwick, and I just wanted to ask you to expand on that because I think it's a fantastic book.
It's one of my favourite rereads. And that was, I think, I don't know whether I'm right or not, but it was certainly one of the first major oral history. The Parchment Stars Turkey, one of the first major oral histories in the modern era. Yeah. And I remember being bowled over because, of course, it's Warhol, Peter Sedgwick, The Velvet Underground. Hello, I'm there. But it was. Now I look at it, it's slightly too much. There's slightly too much about the Sedgwick family. But boy, is it good. And what I liked about it is some of the quotes read beautifully and almost read like poetry. And that's something I carried through into doing this book, is I did edit the quotes quite heavily. Not to take out the sense, but in order to capture the language and the way that each of them spoke, because I liked the way that each of them spoke and formulated their own sentences. And there's something very satisfying about that. And that was a huge book, that Edie book. It was very, very successful in America. I don't know that any of you read it. No, it was fantastic.
What's it called?
Edie, by Gene Stein. Have any of you read it?
No.
Read it. If you're a Velvets fan in particular. I also really like the books by Andrew Lou Goldwyn. Have any of you read them? Stone and Two Stone?
Yeah.
They're really good.
I've read,
the editing in the second one's a bit off, but again,
the
it shows
first
you
one.
what you can do with the immediacy of that format. And I wanted the book to be very tight, no flab, and that was very important. And not, again, as I said, not to put too much of myself in it, because I get very, very tired of writing about music that is about personal experience and nothing else. I don't care whether you were there. Please don't share. Yeah, there you go. I mean, that's the Nick Hornby approach, and you can fuck on that.
As much as I love the music, the lyrics are the things that I keep coming back to. I just want to kind of ask, are those lyrics the product of one 23-year-old man's mind and brain, or were they shared with the band at all, or they just
Peter Hook wrote some lyrics.
Where did they come from?
Well, he was writing, and certainly, because I did the lyrics book with Deborah, and looked at his notebook, and he was writing, he revised. It wasn't a splurge. Some of it is a bit kind of, a bit too much in love with the Nazis in the early days. And fantasies of power, which is not particularly attractive, but that did change. And I think he read copiously. He presented the lyrics to the group. He would direct them to some extent to, the good bits, the riff of the song or whatever, or the hook of the song, and then they would work up the arrangement, and then he would come with a lyric and fit the lyric to the meter. So, a lot of he was very obviously influenced by science fiction. We know that. That's again another futuristic element, and also, this is in those days. It was very hard to get information in the mid-70s. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember this, but there was no social media, no internet, blah, blah, blah. So if you wanted stuff that was out of the ordinary, that was underground, if you were of that way inclined, you'd go to these bookshops. They were in London, they were called Popular Bookstore, and there was one in Manchester that they used to go to called Savoy Books. And all these bookshops would have a mixture of kind of soft porn in one corner, stuck together, pages, Mills and Boon, old pop mags, which is the reason I used to go in, weird science fiction, and Nazi books. And there were a lot of Nazi books at the stage, and they were all kind of Sven Hassel and all that stuff. Because it was 30 years after the Second World War, and of course, as we all know, with Brexit, this country is fucking obsessed with the Second World War. Sorry, these islands are obsessed with it. Can we please get over it? That was the soup, if you like, and then his reading got more organised. His reading Dostoevsky, and a lot of it was pretty doomy stuff, I have to say. It wasn't, it wasn't light reading. And so that fed into his lyrics and his visions. And I mean, again, it goes back to, did he have psychic powers? And I think he did, and I think that's part of the problem. So he could project himself into other times and other places, maybe using his imagination. But certainly, Dead Cells is a pretty chilling track because of the lyric. I mean, it still disturbs me when I hear it. It's a plunge into the underworld.
One thing that really jumped out to me, talking about Ian Curtis as a writer, is this note to Rob Gretton.
Oh, yeah.
After, I mean, I don't know if you guys have all got the book yet, maybe we'll get in it tonight. And I don't think I can read it, but he writes this note to Rob Gretton after the recording of Closer.
Mm-hmm. It's disappointing.
And it's really strange. You must have put it in there for a reason.
Because I was allowed to.
Allowed to.
But also, there's not a lot of Ian Curtis in the book.
No, he was quite guarded. Even his interviews, to me,
he doesn't give anything away.
He doesn't give anything away. It's all stance. It's his stance on things. It's very much, we're glad we're on an independent label in Manchester because we don't want to go to London and have to deal with wankers. Even one thing he says about his lyrics, going back to what you said, he said it's all, he almost says it's not about anything, which is clearly not true. So he clearly doesn't want to talk about it because it's so personal or so painful, or I don't know. That note about the recording sessions is kind of like 20% hilarious, 80% harrowing.
I think that's why I put it in, just to show, the fact he's becoming estranged from the group, and things were not happening anymore. And I'm very friendly with Rob's widow, Leslie Gilbert, and she allowed me to use it. It has been seen, it has been in the public domain, but I thought it was, there's so little of it in the book, and it's, I did a long documentary about 20 years ago about Brian Epstein, and it's a similar kind of thing. You have an absence at the heart of the film or the book because the person is dead and they didn't do that many interviews and they were very guarded. So in a way you're trying to piece together something, if only partly. And I don't think we will ever know it. I don't think we will ever know. So. Any more questions?
Can I just ask about that Genesis P. Yorridge? Do you think that conversation actually happened that night?
I don't know, but I didn't trust it.
Okay.
Honestly, I just couldn't substantiate it. That's the point. There were no corroborative witnesses, and none of the people closely involved with Ian said that he talked to. I mean, he may have talked to Genesis, but I didn't. When he said it, you have to have an ear for these things. I didn't believe what he said.
Right.
That's my fucking book, and it was my film, so... If he wants to write his own book about Ian, fine. I'm not stopping him. And I don't buy into this cult of Genesis, for fuck's sake. Some people do.
Genesis anymore.
What?
He's not called Genesis anymore.
Well, I know. It's all tiring.
And on that bombshell. any more questions?
One is you described yourself as a historian, and obviously you. How difficult was it as being someone involved and was around the band and have your own perceptions of the band and the people involved, and then to do an oral history and hear stories? How difficult was it to weigh up conversations like that? Did you find that? How did you remove yourself? Is my question. Was it really had to take? Obviously, it's 10 years since you've done some of the interviews. I think that would give you time, but it must have been really hard.
No, it wasn't. It was really easy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have a huge ego. That's not where my ego is. My ego is in the work. My ego is not necessarily in saying how fabulous I am or how I was there. I just can't be fucking arsed. So it actually was really easy. And because I knew the people concerned, I knew when they were telling the truth or not. and occasionally there were conflicting accounts, and that's fine. And I didn't cut, there's very little I cut out in the edit. It was mainly just stuff for sense. And there's a little bit of bitching which I cut out because it's not relevant and not interesting. It was the negotiations to get the rights to use the material were torturous, but the actual experience of doing the book was really easy and really fast. I actually did the main assembly of the book in 2 weeks, maybe under. The first draft of the book in 2 weeks. I just blitzed it, and because I like to work fast anyway, because I think it keeps things fresh. Obviously, you do the prep. I do a lot of prep, but then when I'm actually writing, in this case, editing, I like to do it really fast because then you get that freshness, the immediacy, which you have to have.
I've got another question actually. Other, obviously, than your own Joy Division book, what is your favourite book that has been written about them?
Oh, that's a good question. I quite like the very early one that was done because there were no books about them then. Ideal for Living by Mark Johnson, which is something you may know. Just because there were no books about them then.
Yeah, I remember that one too. And there's a quote at the very start of that book about Ian Curtis wanting to escape, and about one of the motivations for the band being that they didn't want to be pushing shit around the factory.
Well, has anybody ever been to Macclesfield?
Yes.
Mac. What is the other great Mac group? The Mac lads.
They slaughtering the dogs and they exploited, so the poster in the toilet.
So yeah, I like that one. I didn't read a lot of other books because I didn't want them to influence me when I was young. I've read Bernard's books since, which I quite enjoyed. It's a bit understated, but there's not a lot of detail about Joy Division in there. I'm looking forward to Stephen's book. Stephen's book will be very good, so that's coming very soon, I think.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to that one. You note I'm remaining silent about the other one.
I quite liked Peter Hook's book.
It's just.
Do you like it?
Have you got your ticket for him to go and Joy Division coming up soon?
Obvious. That's all Joy Division. I don't just see Hooky bearing his head.
Next year?
No, it's just. It's too much.
Fair enough. One more.
No, there's plenty more. That's fine.
Hi John,
Hi.
You're in the fold, you've been invited into the fold of Factory. What about Alan Erasmus? What was his thoughts on Joy Division?
Well, Alan Erasmus was the only person who
wasn't director.
Alan does moan about not being included in anything, but then you call him up and say, Alan, come on, I'm doing this book, come and talk to me. Can I talk to you? Yeah, okay, maybe. And that's all you hear. So it's his desire. But Alan was the only one who told me about the fact that there were problems with the end. None of the others did. Tony did. Before he died, in about April, I remember a train ride with Alan. He said things were not right. And that's the only thing I heard before he was dead.